Howdy, folks. This is going to be my second time trying to record this. I got about 20 minutes in and then got a phone call that I had to take, which totally interrupted the flow of reading. I wanted to do this one because tomorrow is Memorial Day. I'm going to be away and probably not able to read, but we are so close to the end now, I figured that I would wrap up the final two chapters and then we'll be done with Heir to the Empire. So, without further ado, I'm going to try and read through this again. If the phone rings, I'm going to ignore it. I hope you guys enjoy these final chapters. Let me know what you think when the book is over. Chapter 31. Captain Aphan of the escort frigate Larquesse shook his head with thinly disguised contempt, glaring at Wedge from the depths of his pilot's seat. "You X-Wing hotshots," he growled. "You've really got it made, you know that?" Wedge shrugged, trying hard not to take offense. It wasn't easy, but then he'd had lots of practice in the past few days. Aphan had started out from Coruscant with a planetary mass chip on his shoulder, and he'd been nursing it the whole way. And looking out the viewport at the confused mass of ships crowding the Sluis Van Orbit dock area, it wasn't hard to figure out why. "Yeah, well, we're stuck out here too," he reminded the captain. The other snorted. "Yeah, big sacrifice. You lounge around my ship like overpriced trampers for a couple of days, then flit around for 2 hours while I try to dodge bulk freighters and get this thing into a docking station designed for scavenger pickers. And then you pull your snubbies back inside and go back to lounging again. Doesn't exactly qualify as earning your pay in my book." Wedge clamped his teeth firmly around his tongue and stirred his tea a little harder. It was considered bad form to mouth back at senior officers, after all. Even senior officers who'd long since passed their prime. For probably the first time since he had been given command of Rogue Squadron, he regretted having passed up all the other promotions he'd been offered. A higher rank would at least have entitled him to snarl back a little. Lifting his cup for a cautious sip, he gazed out the viewport at the scene around them. No, he amended. He wasn't sorry at all that he'd stayed with his X-Wing. If he hadn't, he'd probably be in exactly the same position as Aphan was right now, trying to run a 920 crew ship with just 15 men, hauling cargo in a ship meant for war. And, like as not, having to put up with hotshot X-Wing pilots who sat around his bridge drinking tea and claiming with perfect justification that they were doing exactly what they'd been ordered to do. He hid a smile behind his mug. Yes, in Aphan's place, he'd probably be ready to spit bulkhead shavings too. Maybe he ought to go ahead and let the other drag him into an argument, in fact. Let him drain off some of that excess nervous energy of his. Eventually, within the hour even, if Sluis Control's latest departure estimate was anywhere close, it would finally be the Larquesse's turn to get out here and head for Befash. It would be nice when that time came for Aphan to be calm enough to handle the ship. Taking another sip of his tea, Wedge looked out the viewport. A couple of refitted passenger liners were making their own break for freedom now, he saw, accompanied by four Corellian corvettes. Beyond them, just visible in the faint light of the space lane marker buoys, was what looked like one of the slightly ovoid transports he used to escort during the height of the war, with a pair of B-wings following. And off to the side, moving parallel to their departure vector, an A-class bulk freighter was coming into the docking pattern, without any escort at all. Wedge watched it creep towards them, his smile fading as old combat senses began to tingle. Swiveling around in his seat, he reached over to the console beside him and punched for a sensor scan. It looked innocent enough. An older freighter, probably a knockoff of the original Corellian Action 4 design, with the kind of exterior that came from either a lifetime of honest work or else a short and spectacularly unsuccessful career in piracy. Its cargo bay registered completely empty, and there was no weapons emplacements that the Larquesse's sensors could pick up. A totally empty freighter. How long had it been, he wondered uneasily, since he'd run across a totally empty freighter? Trouble? Wedge focused on the captain in mild surprise. The other's frustrated anger of a minute ago was gone, replaced by something calm, alert, and battle-ready. Perhaps, the thought strayed through Wedge's mind, Afen wasn't past his prime after all. That incoming freighter, he told the other, setting his cup down on the edge of the console and keying for a comm channel. There's something about it that doesn't feel right. The captain peered out the viewport, then at the sensor scan data Wedge had pulled up. I don't see anything, he said. Me either, Wedge had to admit. There's just something. Blast. What? Control won't let me in, Wedge told him as he keyed off. Too much traffic on the circuits already, they say. Allow me. Afen turned to his own console. The freighter was shifting course now, the kind of slow and careful maneuver that usually indicated the full load, but the cargo bay was still registering empty. There we go, Afen said, glancing at Wedge with grim satisfaction. I've got to tap into their records computer. Little trick you never learned flitting around in the X-Wing. Let's see now. Freighter Nantistu out of Nelik Cram. They were jumped by pirates, got their main drive damaged in the fight, and had to dump their cargo to get away. They're hoping to get some repair work done. Sluis Controls basically told them to get in line. I thought all this relief shipping had more or less taken over the whole place, Wedge frowned. Afen shrugged. Theoretically. In practice, well, the Sluisi are easy enough to talk into bending that kind of rule. You just have to know how to phrase the request. Reluctantly, Wedge nodded. It did all seem reasonable enough, he supposed, and a damaged, empty ship would probably handle something like an intact full one. And the freighter was empty. The Larkessa's sensors said so. But the tingles refused to go away. Abruptly, he dug his comlink from his belt. Rogue Squadron, this is Rogue Leader, he called. Everyone to your ships. He got acknowledgments, looked up to find Afen's eyes steady on him. You still think there's trouble? The other asked quietly. Wedge grimaced, throwing one last look out the viewport at the freighter. Probably not, but it won't hurt to be ready. Anyway, I can't have my pilots sitting around drinking tea all day. He turned and left the bridge at a quick jog. The other 11 members of Rogue Squadron were in their X-Wings by the time he reached the Larkessa's docking bay. 3 minutes later, they launched. The freighter hadn't made much headway, Wedge saw, as they swung up over the Larkessa's hull and pulled together into a loose patrol formation. Oddly enough, though, it had moved a considerable distance laterally, drifting away from the Larkess and towards a pair of Calamari star cruisers orbiting together a few kilometers away. Spread out formation, Wedge ordered his pilots, shifting to an asymptotic approach course. Let's swing by and take a nice casual little look. The others acknowledged. Wedge glanced down with his nav scope, made a minor adjustment to his speed, looked back up again, and in the space of a single heartbeat, the whole thing went straight to hell. The freighter blew up. All at once, without any warning from sensors, without any hint from previous visual observation, it just came apart. Reflexively, Wedge jabbed for his comm control. Emergency, he barked. Ship explosion near orbit dock V475. Send rescue team. For an instant, as chunks of the cargo bay flew outward, he could see into the emptiness there. But even as his eyes and brain registered the odd fact that he could see into the disintegrating cargo bay, but not beyond it, the bay was suddenly no longer empty. One of the X-Wing pilots gasped. A tight-packed mass of something was in there, totally filling the space where the Larkessa's sensors had read nothing. A mass that was even now exploding outward like a hornet's nest behind the pieces of the bay. A mass that in seconds had resolved itself into a boiling wavefront of TIE fighters. Pull up! Wedge snapped to his squadron, leaning his X-Wing into a tight turn to get out of the path of that deadly surge. Come around and reform! S-foils in attack position! And as they swung around in response, he knew with a sinking feeling that Captain Afen had been wrong. Rogue Squadron was indeed going to earn its pay today. The battle for Sluis Van had begun. They'd cleared the outer system defense network and the bureaucratic overload that passed for control at Sluis Van these days, and Han was just getting a bearing on his slot that he'd been given when the emergency call came through. Luke, he shouted back down the cockpit corridor. Got a ship explosion. I'm gonna go check it out. He glanced at the orbit dock map to locate V-475, gave the ship a fractional turn to put them on the right vector, and jerked in his seat as a laser bolt slapped the Falcon hard from behind. He had them gunning into a full forward evasive maneuver before the second shot went sizzling past the cockpit. Over the roar of the engines, he heard Luke's startled sounding yelp, and as the third bolt went past, he finally had a chance to check the aft sensors to see just what was going on. He almost wished he hadn't. Directly behind them, batteries already engaging one of the Sluis Van perimeter battle stations, was an Imperial Star Destroyer. He swore under his breath and kicked the engines a little harder. Beside him, Luke clawed his way forward against the not quite compensated acceleration and into the co-pilot seat. "What's going on?" he asked. "We just walked into an Imperial attack," Han growled, eyes flying over the readouts. "Got a Star Destroyer behind us. There's another one over to starboard. Looks like some other ships with them." "They've got the system bottled up," Luke said, his voice glacially calm. A far cry, Han thought, from his panicky kid that he'd pulled off Tatooine out from under Star Destroyer fire all those years back. "I make it 5 Star Destroyers and something over 20 smaller ships." Han grunted. "At least we know now why they hit Bafash and the others. Wanted to pull enough ships here to make the attack worth their while." The words were barely out of his mouth when the emergency comm channel suddenly came to life again. "Emergency! Imperial TIE fighters in orbit dock area. All ships to battle stations." Luke started. "That sounded like Wedge," he said, punching for transmission. "Wedge, that you?" "Luke?" the other came back. "We got trouble here. At least 40 TIE fighters and 50 truncated cone-shaped things I'd never seen before." He broke off as a screech from the X-Wing's etheric rudder came faintly over the speakers. "I hope you brought a couple of wings of fighters with you," he said. "We're going to be a little pressed here." Luke glanced at Han. "Afraid it's just Han and me and the Falcon, but we're on our way." "Make it fast!" Luke keyed off the speaker. "Is there any way to get me into my X-Wing?" he asked. "Not fast enough," Han shook his head. "We're going to have to drop it here and go in alone." Luke nodded, getting out of his seat. "I'd better make sure Lando and the droids are strapped in and then get up into the gunwale." "Take the top one," Han called after him. The upper deflector shields were running stronger at the moment, and Luke would have more protection there. If there was any protection to be had from 40 TIE fighters and 50 truncated flying cones. For a moment he frowned as a strange thought suddenly struck him. But no, they couldn't possibly be Lando's missing mole miners. Even a Grand Admiral wouldn't be crazy enough to try using something like that in the battle. Boosting power to the forward deflectors, he took a deep breath and headed in. "All ships, commence attack," Pelion called. "Full engagement. Maintain position and status." He got confirmations and turned to Thrawn. "All ships report engaged, sir," he said. But the Grand Admiral didn't seem to hear him. He just stood there at the viewport, gazing outward at the New Republic ships scrambling to meet them, his hands gripped tightly behind his back. "Admiral?" Pelion asked cautiously. "That was them, Captain," Thrawn said, his voice unreadable. "That ship straight ahead, that was the Millennium Falcon, and it was towing an X-Wing starfighter behind it." Pelion frowned past the other. The glow of a drive was indeed barely visible past the flashing laser bolts of the battle, already pretty well out of range and trying hard to be even more so. But as to the design of the craft, much less its identity. "Yes, sir," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Cloak Leader reports a successful breakout, and that the command section of the freighter is making its escape to the periphery. They're encountering some resistance from escort vehicles and a squadron of X-Wings, but the general response has so far been weak and diffuse." Thrawn took a deep breath and turned away from the viewport. "That will change," he told Pelion, back in control again. "Remind him not to push his envelope too far, or to waste excessive time in choosing his targets. Also, that the Space Trooper mole miners should concentrate on Calamari star cruisers. They're likely to have the largest number of defenders aboard." The red eyes glittered. "And inform him that the Millennium Falcon is on its way in." Yes, sir, Pelion said. He glanced out the viewport again, at the distant fleeing ship. Towing an X-Wing. You don't think... Skywalker? Thrawn's face hardened. We'll know soon, he said quietly. And if so, Talon Card will have a great deal to answer for. A great deal. Watch it, Rogue 5, Wedge warned as a flash of laser fire from somewhere behind him shot past and nicked the wing of one of the X-Wings ahead. We picked up a tail! I noticed, the other came back. Pincer? On my mark, Wedge confirmed as a second bolt shot past him. Directly ahead, a Calamari star cruiser was pulling sluggishly away, trying to get out of the battle zone. Perfect cover for this kind of maneuver. Together, he and Rogue 5 dived underneath it. Now! Leaning hard on his etheric rudder, he peeled off hard to the right. Rogue 5 did the same thing to the left. The pursuing TIE fighter hesitated between his diverging targets a split second too long, and even as he swung around to follow Wedge, Rogue 5 blew him out of the sky. Nice shooting, Wedge said, giving the area a quick scan. The TIE fighters still seemed to be everywhere, but for the moment at least, none of them was close enough to give them any trouble. 5 noticed that too. We seem to be out of it, Rogue Leader, he commented. Easy enough to fix, Wedge told him. His momentum was taking him farther under the star cruiser they'd used for cover. Curving up and around it, he started the spiral back towards the main battle area. He was just swinging up along the star cruiser's side when he noticed the small cone-shaped thing nestled up against the larger ship's hull. He craned his neck for a better look as he shot past. It was one of the little craft that had come out with the TIE fighters, all right, sitting pressed up against the star cruiser's bridge blister as if it was welded in place. There was a battle going on nearby, a battle in which his people were fighting and very possibly dying. But something told Wedge that this was important. Hang on a minute, he told 5. I want to check this out. His momentum had already taken him to the star cruiser's bow. He curved around in front of the ship, leaning back into a spiral again. And suddenly his canopy lit up with laser fire, and his X-Wing jolted like a startled animal beneath him. The star cruiser had fired on him. In his ear, he heard 5 shout something. Stay back, Wedge snapped, fighting against a sudden drop in power and giving his scopes a quick scan. I'm hit, but not bad. They fired on you. Yeah, I know, Wedge said, trying to maintain some kind of evasive maneuvering with what little control he had left. Fortunately, the systems were starting to come back online as his R2 unit did some fast rerouting. Even more fortunately, the star cruiser didn't seem inclined to shoot at them again. But why had it fired in the first place? Unless... His own R2 was too busy with rerouting chores to handle anything else at the moment. Rogue 5, I need a fast sensor scan, he called. Where are the rest of those cone things? Hang on, I'll check, the other replied. Scope shows I don't find more than about 15 of them. Nearest one's 10 kilometers away, bearing 118 Mark IV. Wedge felt something hard settled into his stomach. 15 out of the 50 that had been in that freighter with the TIE fighters. So where had the rest of them gone? Let's go take a look, he said, turning into an intercept vector. The cone thing was heading towards another escort frigate like the Larkess he saw, with 4 TIE fighters running interference for it. Not that there was much potential for interference. If the frigate was manned anywhere near as sparsely as the Larkess, it would have precious little chance of fighting back. Let's see if we can take them before they notice us, he told 5 as they closed the distance. Abruptly, all 4 TIE fighters peeled off and came around. So much for surprise. Take the 2 on the right, Rogue 5. I'll take the others. Copy. Wedge waited until the last second before firing on the first of his targets, swinging around instantly to avoid collision with the other. It swept past beneath him, his X-Wing shuddering as it took another hit. He leaned hard into the turn, catching a glimpse of the TIE fighter dropping into a pursuit slot as it did so. And suddenly something shot past him, spitting laser fire and twisting back and around in some kind of an insane variant on a drunkard's walk evasive maneuver. The TIE fighter caught a direct hit and blew into a spectacular cloud of fiery gas. Wedge finished his turn just as Rogue Five's second target fighter did likewise. "All clear, Wedge," a familiar voice called into his ear. "You damaged?" "I'm fine, Luke," Wedge assured him. "Thanks." "Look, there it goes," Han's voice cut in. "Over by the frigate. It's one of Lando's mole miners, all right." "I see it," Luke said. "What's it doing out here?" "I saw one stuck onto the star cruiser back there," Wedge told him, swinging back on course for the frigate. "Looks like this one's trying to do the same thing. I don't know why." "Whatever it's doing, let's stop it," Han said. "Right." It was, Wedge saw, going to be a close race, but it was quickly clear that the mole miner was going to win it. Already it had turned its base around towards the frigate and was starting to nestle up against the hull. And just before it closed the gap completely, he caught a glimpse of an accurately brilliant light. "What was that?" Luke asked. "I don't know," Wedge said, blinking away the afterimage. "It looked too bright for laser fire." "It was a plasma jet," Han grunted as the Falcon came up alongside him. "Right on top of the bridge emergency escape hatch. That's what they wanted the mole miners for. They're using them to burn through the hulls." He broke off, and abruptly he swore. "Luke, we got it backwards. They're not here to wreck the fleet. They're here to steal it." For a long heartbeat, Luke just stared at the frigate. And then, like pieces clicking together in a puzzle, it all fell into place. The mole miners, the undermanned and underdefended capital ships that the New Republic had been forced to press into shipping service, the Imperial fleet out there that seemed to be making no real effort to push its way past the system's defenses, and a New Republic star cruiser, mole miner planted firmly on its side, that had just fired on Wedge's X-Wing. He took a moment to scan the sky around him. Moving with deceptive slowness through the continuing starfighter battle, a number of warships were beginning to pull out. "We've got to stop them," he told the others. "Good thinking," Han agreed. "How?" "Is there any way we can get aboard them ourselves?" he asked. "Lando said the mole miners were two-man ships. The Imperials can't possibly have packed more than 4 or 5 stormtroopers in each one of them." "The way those warships are manned at the moment, 4 stormtroopers would be plenty," Wedge pointed out. "Yes, but I could take them," Luke said. "On all 50 ships?" Han countered. "Besides, you blast a hatch open to vacuum and you'll have pressure bulkheads closing all over the ship. Take you forever to even get to the bridge." Luke gritted his teeth, but Han was right. "Then we have to disable them," he said. "Knock out their engines or control systems or something. If they get out to the perimeter in those star destroyers, we'll never see them again." "Oh, we'll see them again," Han growled, pointed straight back at us. "You're right. Disabling as many as we can is our best shot. We're never going to stop all 50, though." "We don't have to stop 50 to stop, at least not yet," Wedge put in. "There are still 12 mole miners that haven't attached themselves to ships." "Good. Let's take them out first," Han said. "You got vectors on them?" "Feeding your computer now." "Okay. Okay, here we go." The Falcon twisted around and headed off in a new direction. "Luke, get on the comm and tell Sluis Control what's happening," he added. "Tell them not to let any of the ships out of the orbit dock area." "Right." Luke switched channels on the comm, and as he did so, he was suddenly aware of a slight change in sense from the Falcon's cockpit. "Han, you all right?" "Huh? Sure. Why?" "I don't know. You seem to change." "I had half a grip on some idea," Han said, "but it's gone now. Come on, make that call. I want you back on the quads when we get there." The call to Sluis Control was over well before they reached their target mole miner. "They thank us for the information," Luke reported to the others, "but they say they don't have anything to spare at the moment to help us." "Probably don't," Han agreed. "Okay, I see 2 TIE fighters running escort. Wedge, you and Rogue 5 take them out while Luke and I hit the mole miner." "Got it," Wedge confirmed. The 2 X-Wings shot past Luke's canopy, flaring apart into intercept mode as the TIE fighters broke formation and came around to meet the attack. "Luke, try to blow it apart instead of disintegrating it," Han suggested. "Let's see how many people the Imperials have got stuffed inside." "Got it," Luke said. The mole miner was in his sights now. Adjusting his power level down, he fired. The truncated cone flared as the metal dead center of the shot boiled away into glowing gas. The rest of the craft seemed intact, though, and Luke was just lining up for a second shot when the hatch at the top abruptly popped open. And through the opening, a monstrous, robot-like figure came charging out. What? It's a space trooper, Han snapped back. A stormtrooper in zero-G armor. Hang on! He spun the Falcon around away from the space trooper, but not before there was a flash from a protuberance atop the other's backpack, and the hull around Luke slammed with a violent concussion. Han rolled the ship around, blocking Luke's view, as another concussion rocked them. And then they were pulling away, but with agonizing slowness. Luke swallowed hard, wondering what kind of damage they'd taken. Han! Luke! You all right? Wedge's voice called anxiously. Yeah, for now, Han called back. You get the TIE fighters? Yes, I think the mole miner's still underway, though. Well then, blast it, Han said. Nothing cute, just blow it apart. But watch out for that space trooper. He's using miniature proton torpedoes or something. I'm trying to draw him away. I don't know if he'll fall for it. He's not, Wedge said grimly. He's staying right on top of the mole miner. They're heading for a passenger liner. Looks like they'll make it, too. Han swore under his breath. Probably got a few regular stormtrooper buddies still in there. All right, I guess we do this the hard way. Hang on, Luke. We're going to ram him. We're what? Luke's last word was lost in the roar from the engines as Han sent the Falcon flying straight out and then around to a hard turn. The mole miner and space trooper came back into Luke's line of sight. Wedge had been wrong. The space trooper wasn't standing by the damaged mole miner. He was, in fact, sidling quickly away from it. The twin protuberances on top of his backpack began flashing again, and a couple of seconds later the Falcon's hull began ringing with proton torpedo blasts. Get ready, Han called. Luke braced himself, trying not to think about what would happen if one of those torpedoes hit his canopy, and trying, too, not to wonder if Han could really ram the space trooper without also plowing into the passenger liner directly behind him. Ignoring the proton blasts, the Falcon continued accelerating, and without warning, Han dropped the ship beneath the space trooper's line of fire. Wedge, go! From beneath Luke's line of sight, an X-wing flashed upward, laser cannon blazing, and the mole miner shattered into flaming dust. Good shot, Han told him, a note of satisfaction in his voice, as he veered underneath the liner, nearly taking the Falcon's main sensor dish off in the process. There you go, hotshot. Enjoy your view of the battle. Belatedly, the light dawned. He was listening in on our channel, Luke said. You just wanted to decoy him into moving away from the mole miner. You got it, Han said. I figured he'd tap in. Imperials always do when they can. He trailed off. What is it? Luke asked. I don't know, Han said slowly. There's something about this whole thing that keeps poking at me, but I can't figure out what it is. Never mind. Our hotshot space trooper will keep for now. Let's go hit some more mole miners. It was just as well, Pelion thought, that they were only here to keep the enemy tied up. The Sluisi and their New Republic allies were putting up one terrific fight. On his status board, a section of the Chimera's shield schematics went red. Get that starboard shield back up, he ordered, giving the sky in that direction a quick scan. There were half a dozen warships out there, all of them firing like mad, with a battle station in backstop position behind them. If their sensors showed that the Chimera's starboard shields were starting to go. Starboard turbolasers. Focus all fire on the assault frigate at 32 Mark 40, Thrawns spoke up calmly. Concentrate on the starboard side of the ship only. The Chimera gun crews responded with a withering hail of laser fire. The assault frigate tried to swerve away, but even as it turned, its entire starboard side seemed to flash with vaporized metal. The weapons from that section, which had been firing non-stop, went abruptly silent. Excellent, Thrawn said. Starboard truck crews, lock on and bring it in close. Try to keep it between the damaged shields and the enemy, and be sure to keep its starboard side facing towards us. The port side may still have active weapons and a crew to use them. Clearly against its will, the assault frigate began to move inward. Pelion watched it for a moment, then returned his attention to the overall battle. He had no doubt the tractor crew would do the job right. They'd shown a remarkable increase in efficiency and competence lately. "TIE Squadron 4, keep after that B-Wing group," he instructed. "Port ion cannon. Keep up the pressure on that command center." He looked at Thrawn. "Any specific orders, Admiral?" Thrawn shook his head. "No, the battle seems to be progressing as planned." He turned his glowing eyes on Pelion. "What word from Cloak Leader?" Pelion checked the proper display. "The TIE fighters are still engaging the various escort ships," he reported. 43 of the mole miners have successfully attached to target ships. Of those, 39 are secure and making for the perimeter. 4 are still encountering internal resistance, though they anticipate a quick victory. "And the other 8? "They've been destroyed," Pelion told him, "including 2 of those with a space trooper aboard. One of those space troopers is failing to respond to comm, presumably killed with his craft. The other is still functional. Cloak Leader has ordered him to join the attack on the escort ships." "Countermand that," Thrawn said. "I'm quite aware that stormtroopers have infinite confidence in themselves, but that sort of deep space combat is not what space trooper suits were designed for. Have Cloak Leader detail a TIE fighter to bring him out, and also inform him that his wing is to begin pulling back to the perimeter." Pelion frowned. "You mean now, sir?" "Certainly now." Thrawn nodded towards the viewport. "The first of our new ships will begin arriving within 15 minutes. As soon as they're all with us, the task force will be withdrawing." "But the rebel forces within the perimeter are of no further concern to us, Captain," Thrawn said with quiet satisfaction. "The captured ships are on their way. With or without TIE fighter cover, there's nothing the rebels can do to stop them." Han brought the Falcon as close as he could to the frigate's engines without risking a backwash, feeling the slight multiple dips in ship's power as Luke repeatedly fired the quads. "Anything?" he asked as they came up around the other side. "Doesn't look like it," Luke said. "There's just too much armor over the coolant feeder lines." Han glanced along the frigate's course, fighting back the urge to swear. They were already uncomfortably close to the perimeter battle and getting closer all the time. "This isn't getting us anywhere. There's got to be some way to take out a capital ship." "That's what other capital ships are for," Wedge put in. "But you're right. This isn't working." Han pursed his lips. "R2, you still online back there?" he called. The droid's beeping came faintly up the cockpit corridor. "Go through your schematics again," Han ordered. "See if you can find us another weak point." R2 beeped again in acknowledgement, but it wasn't a very optimistic beep. "He's not going to find anything better, Han," Luke told him, echoing Han's own private assessment. "I don't think we've got any choice left. I'm going to have to go topside and use my lightsaber on it." "That's crazy, and you know it," Han growled. "Without a proper pressure suit, and with engine coolant spraying all over you if it works." "How about using one of the droids?" Wedge suggested. "Neither one of them can do it," Luke told him. "R2 hasn't got the manipulative ability, and I wouldn't trust 3PO with a weapon. Especially not with all the high acceleration maneuvers we're making." "What we need is a remote manipulator arm," Han said. "Something that Luke could use inside while—" He broke off. In a flash of inspiration, there it was. The thing that had been bothering him ever since they'd walked into this crazy battle. "Lando!" he called into the intercom. "Lando! Get up here!" "I've got him strapped in," Luke reminded him. "Well, go unstrap him and get him up here," Han snapped. "Now!" Luke didn't waste time with questions. "Right," he said. "What is it?" Wedge asked tensely. Han clenched his teeth. "We were there on Naklon when the Imperials stole these mole miners from Lando," he told the other. "We had to reroute our communications through some jamming." "Okay, so?" "So why were they jamming us?" Han asked. "To keep us from calling for help? From who? They're not jamming us here, you notice." "I give up," Wedge said, starting to sound a little testy. "Why?" "Because they had to. Because most of the mole miners on Naklon were running on radio remote," came a tired voice from behind him. Han turned around to see Lando easing his way carefully into the cockpit, clearly running at half speed, but just as clearly determined to make it. Luke was right behind him, a steadying hand at his elbow. "You heard all that?" Han asked him. "Every part that mattered," Lando said, dropping into the co-pilot's seat. "I could kick myself for not seeing it long ago." "Me too. You remember any of the command codes?" "Most of them," Lando said. "What do you need?" "We don't have time for anything fancy," Han nodded towards the frigate, now lying below them. "The mole miners are still attached to the ships. Just start them all running." Lando looked at him in surprise. "Start them running?" he echoed. "You got it," Han confirmed. "All of them are going to be near a bridge or control wing. If they can burn through enough equipment and wiring, it should knock out the whole lot of them." Lando exhaled noisily, tilting his head sideways in a familiar gesture of reluctant acceptance. "You're the boss," he said, fingers moving over the comm keyboard. "I just hope you know what you're doing. Ready?" Han braced himself. "Do it." Lando keyed a final section of code, and beneath them, the frigate twitched. Not a big twitch, not at first, but as the seconds passed, it became increasingly clear that something down there was wrong. The main engines flickered a few times and then died, amid short bursts from the auxiliaries. Its drive towards the perimeter fighting faltered, its etheric control surfaces kicking in and then out again, striving to change course in random directions. The big ship floundered almost to a halt, and suddenly the side of the hull directly opposite the mole miner's position erupted in a brilliant burst of flame. "It's cut all the way through," Lando gasped, his tone not sure whether to be proud or dismayed by his handiwork. A TIE fighter, perhaps answering a distress call from the stormtroopers inside, swept directly into the stream of superheated plasma before it could maneuver away. It emerged from the other side, its solar panels blazing with fire, and exploded. "It's working," Wedge called, sounding awed. "Look! It's working!" Han looked up from the frigate. All around them, all throughout the orbit dock area, ships that had been making for deep space were suddenly twisting around like metallic animals in the throes of death. All of them with tongues of flame shooting from their sides. For a long minute, Thrawn sat in silence, staring down at his status boards, apparently oblivious to the battles still raging on all around them. Pelion held his breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion of injured pride at the unexpected reversal, wondering what form that explosion would take. Abruptly, the Grand Admiral raised his eyes to the viewport. "Have all the remaining Cloak Force TIE fighters returned to our ships, Captain?" he asked calmly. "Yes, sir," Pelion told him, still waiting. Thrawn nodded. "Then order the task force to begin its withdrawal." "Ah, withdrawal?" Pelion asked cautiously. It was not exactly the order he'd been anticipating. Thrawn looked at him, a faint smile on his face. "You were expecting, perhaps, that I'd order an all-out attack?" he asked. "That I would seek to cover our defeat in a frenzy of false and futile heroics?" "Of course not," Pelion protested. But he knew down deep that the other knew the truth. Thrawn's smile remained, but was suddenly cold. "We haven't been defeated, Captain," he said quietly. "Merely slowed down a bit. We have Wayland, and we have the treasures of the Emperor's storehouse. Sluis Van was to be merely a preliminary to the campaign, not the campaign itself. As long as we have Mount Tantus, our ultimate victory is still assured." He looked out the viewport, a thoughtful expression on his face. "We've lost this particular prize, Captain, but that's all we've lost. I will not waste ships and men trying to change that which cannot be changed. There will be many more opportunities to obtain the ships we need. Carry out your orders." "Yes, Admiral," Pelion said, turning back to his status board, a surge of relief washing through him. So there would not be an explosion after all. And with a twinge of guilt, he realized that he should have known better from the start. Thrawn was not merely a soldier, like so many others Pelion had served with. He was instead a true warrior, with his eye set on the final goal and not on his own personal glory. Taking one last look out the viewport, Pelion issued the order to retreat, and wondered, once again, what the Battle of Endor would have looked like if Thrawn had been in command. Chapter 32. It took a while longer after the Imperial fleet pulled out for the battle to be officially over. But with the Star Destroyers gone, the outcome was never in doubt. The regular stormtroopers were the easiest. Most of them were dead already, killed when Lando's activation of the mole miners had ruptured the air seals of their stolen ships and left them open to vacuum, and the rest were taken without much trouble. The 8 remaining space troopers, whose zero-G suits had allowed them to keep fighting after their ships were disabled, were another story entirely. Ignoring all calls to surrender, they fanned out through the shipyards, clearly intent on causing as much damage as they could before the inevitable. 6 were hunted down and destroyed, the other 2 eventually self-destructed, one managing to cripple a corvette in the process. He left behind him a shipyard and orbit dock facility in an uproar, and a great number of severely damaged major ships. Not exactly what you'd call a resounding victory, Captain Nathan grunted, surveying what was left of the Larkessa's bridge through a pressure bulkhead viewport as he gingerly adjusted a battle dressing that had been applied to his forehead. Going to take a couple months' work just to rewire all the control circuits. Would you rather have the Imperials have gotten them all whole? Han demanded from behind him, trying to ignore his own mixed feelings about the whole thing. Yes, it had worked, but at what cost? Not at all, Aphid replied calmly. You did what you had to, and I'd say that even if my own neck hadn't been on the line, I'm just saying what others will say, that destroying all these ships in order to save them was not exactly the optimal solution. Han threw a look at Luke. You sound like Counselor Failure, he accused Aphid. The other nodded. Exactly. Well, fortunately, Failure's only one voice, Luke offered. Yeah, but it's a loud one, Han said sourly. And one that a lot of people are starting to listen to, Wedge added, including important military people. He'll find some way to parlay this incident into his own political gain, Aphid rumbled. You just watch him. Han's rejoinder was interrupted by a trilling from the wall intercom. Aphid stepped over and tapped the switch. Aphid here, he said. Sluis Control Communications, a voice replied. We have an incoming call from Coruscant for Captain Solo. Is he with you? Right here, Han called, stepping over to the speaker. Go ahead. There was a slight pause, and then a familiar and sorely missed voice came on. Han? It's Leia. Leia, Han said, feeling a delighted and probably slightly foolish-looking grin spread across his face. A second later, though. Wait a minute. What are you doing back on Coruscant? I think I've taken care of our other problems, she said. Her voice, he noticed for the first time, sounded tense and more than a little ragged. At least for the moment. Han threw a frown across the room at Luke. You think? Look, that's not important right now, she insisted. What's important is that you get back here right away. Something cold and hard settled into Han's stomach. For Leia to be this upset. What's wrong? He heard her take a deep breath. Admiral Akbar has been arrested and removed from command, on charges of treason. The room abruptly filled with a brittle silence. Han looked in turn at Luke, at Aphid, at Wedge, but there didn't seem to be anything to say. I'll be there as soon as I can, he told Leia. Luke's here too. You want me to bring him? Yes, if he can manage it, she said. Akbar's going to need all the friends he can get. Okay, Han said. Call me in the Falcon if there's any news. We're heading over there right now. I'll see you soon. I love you, Han. Me too. He broke the connection, turned back to the others. Well, he said to no one in particular, there goes the hammer. You coming, Luke? Luke looked at Wedge. Have your people had a chance to do anything with my X-Wing yet? Not yet, Wedge said, shaking his head. But it's just been officially bumped to the top of the priority list. We'll have it ready to fly in 2 hours, even if I have to take the motivators out of my own ship to do it. Luke nodded and looked back at Han. I'll fly into Coruscant on my own then, he said. Let me just come with you and get R2 off the Falcon. Right. Come on. Good luck, Aphid called softly after them. And yes, Han thought as they hurried down the corridor towards the hatchway where the Falcon was docked, the hammer was indeed coming down. If Failure and his faction pushed too hard and too fast, and knowing Failure, he would almost certainly push too hard and too fast. We could be on the edge of a civil war here, Luke murmured, his thought back at him. Yeah, well, we're not going to let that happen, Han told him with a confidence he didn't feel. We haven't gone through a war and back just to watch some overambitious Bothan wreck it. How are we going to stop him? Han grimaced. We'll think of something. And that's the end of the book. So, after all of that, I think that you can see that Thrawn is indeed a long-term planner. He put together this operation in his mind to put all of the opposing pieces exactly where he wanted them. And he also understood that even though he didn't get the ships that he wanted to rebuild a small fleet, he denied their use to the enemy, which is something that Sun Tzu probably would have approved of. Anyway, let me know what you think. I have not decided if I'm going to do Dark Force Rising yet. I think I probably will at some point, but at the same time, I think I might want to take a short break because this has been an awful lot of reading. Let me know what you guys think. If you did enjoy it, if you don't mind, I would appreciate it if you guys shared and told other people about it. I kind of like bringing this to people who haven't had the opportunity to read these books before. It's been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed hearing your guys' reactions. So I hope you all have a great Memorial Day weekend if you are in the United States. If you are elsewhere, I hope the weekend itself was good, and I'll talk to you all again real soon.